Hello, Nancy No Havoc Johnston here, Mediums for Trump. It is a rainy spring, cool day, but green and beautiful nonetheless. So this week we're going to talk about history. You know I love history. For 20 years, almost 20 years, I proudly served on the board of the Washington Association of New Jersey, which advised the Morristown National Historical Park, which is the first national historical park within the United States, congressionally mandated in 1933. It was one of, I think, 50 historical national parks within the national park system, within the federal government. So on that board, I helped raise money, hosted fundraisers. We helped the entire board had input into the design of the redesign of the museum that was old and outdated, and a worthy cause. But I also got to know a lot about history and really enjoyed my time there. And the more we learn about history, the more we learn about ourselves. And so there's one interesting story about the revolution, and it went on, the battles went on. Although the Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776, there were battles, full on until, many years later. So this certain battle was the Battle of Brandywine in 1777. And there were over 12,000 British troops near Brandywine, and there were the Patriots. There was the Loyalists and the Patriots, and the Loyalists were loyal to the Queen or the King, and the Patriots wanted to break off, become America. So before the battles, they had certain scouts and different things like that. And so before the Battle of Brandywine, there was this one important Loyalist. His name was Scott Ferguson, and I believe he was a lieutenant. I might be mistaken. He was known as Britain's finest marksman. He had invented his own gun, which was patented, and it was such a fine gun that they tried to replicate it. Again, this is way back in the Revolution, and there were no mass marketings or anything like that, so it took a while to make more guns. But he had a small regiment of marksmen, not as good as him, who went along with him, and he was given the duty of taking out senior officials. So before the Battle of Brandywine in Chadsford, Pennsylvania, there he was, looking out, and who does he see in sight but George Washington with a fellow, as documents recall, with a funny hat. Now, George Washington had, Secret Service. They were called safeguards, and they were known as wearing large, plumed, feathered black hats. Now, some people say it may have been a safeguard. Some people say it could have been Count Pulaski. Later, in a letter to Congress, George Washington wrote that he had been scouting the Brandywine battlefield before the battle. So most people believe it was George Washington. But getting back to that time, just before that battle, Ferguson had George Washington in his scope, in his eyesight, and could easily have taken him out. He couldn't. He had his gun. There were 3 men behind him, or 3 or 4 of his troop. He said to put down the gun. He felt an overwhelming sense of disgust. He couldn't shoot George Washington. He felt it dishonorable. He had such respect for that man. And so at times, for me, if you're, for those light workers, the enlightened, we go inward. We feel our way through life. Does this feel right? Does this make sense? So Scott Ferguson, God, put such a level of disgust within him that he actually put down and saved George Washington's life. Now, what would have happened if he had been shot? Years later, I'm going to read from my notes. American historian Lyman C. Draper wrote, and I quote, "How slight oftentimes are the incidents which seem to give direction to the most momentous concerns of the human race. This singular impulse of Ferguson illustrates, in a forcible manner, the overruling hand of Providence in directing the operation of a man's mind when he himself is at least of all aware of it." So who knows what would have happened? Would we have lost the war? But God instilled in Ferguson that day that level of disgust that he had to put down his weapon. Ferguson went on to kill many people afterwards. He himself was killed later, I believe in Charlotte, North Carolina, years later. But, he had a dark reputation for killing many. So this putting down of his weapon contradicted his whole being. But it was an honorable act. So for those who are still questioning Donald Trump, think of what he's doing. Yes, he's cutting waste, bureaucratic waste. It makes sense. Yes, he's against wars. Unless you really want the military-industrial complex to succeed, you should be against bloodshed. It makes sense. So let's go to our instincts and let's think about what Donald Trump is doing. It makes sense. So mediums for Trump, that's my little blurb of history. Happy Mother's Day to all, and God bless.